is I think that people assume that if you're going at a slower speed, then aero doesn't matter. But actually, the slower you're going, the more you're actually out on the course for a longer period of time, and you actually end up saving more time overall with certain aerodynamic gains the slower you go, which
Hello and welcome to GoOff. Today we have an episode with the United States and we have Dylan Johnson with us. Hello,
hi, thanks for having me.
thanks you for joining. So, brief introduction of yourself. I think some of our listeners know you already from your channel, from your racing, but feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I think some people may know me from YouTube. That's where most people know me from, but I am a professional gravel racer in the US. I compete in the Lifetime Grand Prix. Also do some mountain bike racing, and I train a lot on the road, so I'm familiar with multiple disciplines of cycling. But I'm also a cycling coach. I have my own cycling coaching company, and then I also do science-based cycling content on YouTube as well.
Which is fantastic. It's been more or less how I spent my last winters on Zwift, like having two screens. One was on Watopia and the other one was on your videos. How did you come into cycling? Was it something that developed, I don't know, through high school, university, or it changed, I don't know, later on?
Mhm. Yeah, my dad got me a mountain bike when I was, I think, either 11 or 12 years old. I started riding. I think I did my first mountain bike race when I was 14, and it was probably around 15 or 16 years old that I got pretty serious into racing and training.
Mhm.
And by the time I was 18 and I was going to college, I kind of knew that I wanted to pursue cycling either as a racer or as a coach. So I got my degree in exercise science and I started working at CTS, which is the biggest cycling coaching company in the US, immediately after college. And I was racing all through this time as well, mostly mountain bike racing. But during this whole time, gravel is also starting to increase in popularity, and I made the shift over to gravel. And I guess that kind of brings us to where we are now. I started my YouTube channel. I started my own coaching company, and then at the same time, I've also my performance on the bike has increased to the point where I I can kind of compete at the pro level in gravel as well. I'm usually not winning the races, but I'm at least competitive.
You consider yourself a coach, an athlete, or an entrepreneur? What's your opinion about yourself? Choose one.
If I had to choose one, well, I think that the one that I'm the most passionate about is being a racer. Um,
Nice.
and that's the one that I want to succeed in the most, because that was my dream ever since I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
So I would probably go with that one.
Also, probably have a more limited time span of being a high level racer, no? So after a certain age, it's it's difficult to be, when you're 50, it's
Exactly.
you're
Yeah.
not competing anymore.
Yeah. I'm 29 years old right now, and so I know that there's only a limited number of years that
Yeah.
I can feasibly be a professional racer. Probably once I hit that point, that I've kind of hit my ceiling, and now I'm on the decline. Maybe I'll go a little bit harder into coaching and
Mhm.
entrepreneurship.
Well, Friel said that until 35, you're okay, so you shouldn't even worry about it. So you're good.
Yeah, yeah.
And Geraint Thomas, which is above that line, said, "Yeah, last year was my best year in physiological terms." So yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
you have some time ahead.
Hmm.
You mentioned also gravel. So gravel I'm from Europe. I'm from Italy. In Italy, it's we are not sure what to think about gravel. How is it in the US? How is it considered overall?
Yeah, so both road racing and mountain bike racing have I would say, been declining in popularity in the US for whatever reason. I mean, there's probably different reasons for both, but um, professional racing on the mountain bike side is, I would say, almost dead at this point. If you want to be a professional mountain bike racer, you have to go over to Europe and race the World Cups.
Mhm,
And it's not that far off with road racing.
mhm,
There are some road racers in the U.S. that make a living, kind of usually doing more crit racing, but I would say they're few and far between. And I think that what is replacing those two disciplines in the US is gravel. And the best riders from both mountain biking and road are slowly funneling into gravel. And not even the best riders, just riders in general. You know, your mid pack,
mhm.
your age groupers, they are slowly leaving mountain biking and road racing to come to gravel racing. And so these gravel events are kind of exploding in popularity, and that's where a lot of the marketing dollars are. That's kind of where the fast racers are now. And I don't necessarily know what the future holds, but if we continue this trend, and I think it's already gotten to this point, I personally think that gravel is the biggest thing going in cycling in the US right now.
Mhm. And what is a gravel race? I mean, in a road race, it's pretty clear. It's usually between 3 and 5 hours, can vary a little bit.
Mhm.
In criteriums, it's usually between 60 and 120 minutes. In mountain bike cross country is usually between an hour and an hour 30, something like that. Marathons are 4 hours.
Mhm.
Gravel, at least in Europe, is a question mark. We don't really understand if it's, I don't know, 12 hours or four. How is
Mhm.
it in the US?
Yeah, I know that the UCI World Cup gravel, or the World, what are they calling it? World Cup or World Series? Okay, I can't even remember.
I think Siri, no, mountain bike is World Cup.
Mountain bikes world. I can't remember what they're calling the gravel thing, but those UCI gravel races I know are shorter. They're in the, I guess, 2 to 3 hour range, depending. I would say that here in the US, generally the big races are 5 to 10 hours. Most of
Mhm.
them are probably in the six or 7 hour range. So they're generally long events. They're events that would take you longer than a road race.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There are some shorter gravel races, don't get me wrong, but usually those gravel races are, I would say, local level gravel races, not
Okay.
national level.
Yeah, but just to make a comparison, if in road cycling you have the monuments that are around 5 hours, and then there's maybe Milano San Remo, which is an hour more than the others, more or less in cycling in Europe, that is the ballpark. So if you're
Mhm.
saying me that the main gravel races are between 6 and 10, I understand it's a little bit longer
Mhm.
than road racing. Uh, what does it take to be successful in gravel races? How different in what are the characteristics that are different from, let's say, physiological point of view, the way you train? Um, yeah,
Mhm.
what does it take you to develop to be very good, to win, or to finish in the
Sure.
first 10%?
So, I mean, gravel racing is not, it depends on the course, but gravel racing can be fairly similar to road racing in that we're talking about usually riding in a pack, drafting, sometimes coming down to a sprint finish, that sort of thing. But it is at a slower speed and there's a higher amount of resistance. And generally, what I find the difference between the efforts in a road race versus a gravel race is that the efforts in a road race are quite sharp, meaning that there might be some time where you are just barely pedaling
Yeah.
and you're just rolling with the group, but then when
Yeah,
you're on.
Milano San Remo first 3 4 hours.
Exactly, exactly. But then when you're on, you're really on and you're really going hard, and it's a very sharp effort. Requires very high power outputs. Whereas I would say that generally, and of course it depends on the race, I'm making a generalization here, but I would say generally gravel races tend to be more of a steadier power output for the entire race, even if you're riding with a bunch. For example, Unbound usually when you look at a power file from Unbound, what it ends up looking like is the person is holding their tempo power for as long as they possibly can until they blow up. It's
Does
not
this
necessarily sharp efforts.
does this make it closer to triathlon?
It could, yeah. I mean, I would say triathlon is on one end of the extreme because obviously an Ironman, the bike leg of an Ironman is a very
Yeah,
flat.
yeah,
Um, if you look at the power file, but and then in a road race, it's very spiky. I would say it's between those two. So it's not quite over to what triathlon is, and it's not quite over to what road racing is. I would say it's a mixture of both, and depending on the race, it's probably going to be somewhere
yeah.
in between.
But this could be also a road to success for people because road race, as you said, some big spikes
Mhm.
cut out of the race a lot of people that they feel they lose the main group or stuff like that. While triathlon gained appeal because it was based on yourself, based on controlling your tempo. Uh,
Mhm.
I see similarities in why it attracts people from other regions because if you say it's between 6 and 10 hours for the winner, it means for the guy that doesn't win but finishes somewhere in the middle,
Mhm.
it's a long day on the saddle. So pacing and holding your effort can be different. So you mostly how do you differentiate? Differentiate training for gravel or on road, or do you make something similar? Do you focus perhaps more on, I don't know, LT1 for gravel racing and more on, I don't know, anaerobic parts on road, or how do you
I
see
would
this?
I would say that that's correct, and again, it depends on what the person's strengths and weaknesses are, and it depends on what gravel and or road race this hypothetical person would be training for. I mean, there's all different types of road racing. There's road races
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah.
long climbs. There's road races that'll probably end in a sprint finish. There's the same with gravel races. So it's very hard to make a blanket statement that this is how you would train for a gravel race and this is how you would train for a road race because there's different demands depending on the course. But in general, I would say yes, you would be focusing more on short duration power for road racing, and you'd be focusing more on long duration power for gravel racing. And at least in the US, a lot of the training seems to be focused around doing a big volume of LT1 and probably big volume in general. Most riders, when they're preparing for a race, they might back off the volume a little bit and increase the intensity. And I'm not saying that gravel racers don't do that. They probably do leading right into the race, but the volume stays pretty high
Mm-hmm.
to prepare yourself for a high volume event. Just Unbound in particular, we're
Yeah.
talking about a 10 to 12 hour race for the fast riders. So it's a very high volume event. So backing off the volume too much is a mistake.
Yeah. 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 And for gravel racing, most of the training is done on the gravel bike and on the gravel roads, or is it mixed with, you make some training on the road with the road bike, something on the mountain bike? Do you train downhill? How is this, let's say, from the more technical part
Sure.
carried out?
Sure. So there is a technical component to gravel racing. It's not quite as important as in mountain bike racing, but when this is, I'll talk about myself personally, what I do, because again, you'll get all kinds of different answers from different people. But I'm probably spending, I would say, 50% of my training time on the road and maybe 30% on gravel, and then the remaining time would be on a mountain bike. So it's still majority on the road. And when I say on the road, that could be on a gravel bike on the road.
But it's, I
Um,
mean, on tarmac, let's say this way.
sure, yeah, yeah. But I still have a road bike and I ride on the road bike quite frequently.
Which
Um,
bike do you have?
I just switched bike sponsors, so I am on Felt now, and I've got the Felt AR road bike.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have a question that I also asked you a couple of years ago on a different podcast. How many bikes do you have?
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to. I would have to do some counting in my head. It's probably over 15 bikes right now.
Okay.
I have so many. I need to sell some bikes. I've got so many.
Good, good,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, it's 15 is it's a solid number, I would say.
Yeah.
And back on training. Do you train people like differently based on the discipline that they do? Or do you take, let's say, decisions based on how the characteristics of the people are? Let's say we have climber, and he races in gravel or in mountain biking road. Will you try to develop him related to the discipline or related to his main strengths and weaknesses?
I would say both are taken into account, for sure. Yeah. So if I mean, just as an example, I'm coaching a fellow lifetime Grand Prix athlete now, and one of his big weaknesses, I would say, is his short duration power. Not good at sprinting, not good at 30-second efforts, not good at 1 minute efforts.
Hmm.
And I would normally not focus on those types of efforts for a lifetime Grand Prix athlete, but because they are such a weakness for him,
Yeah.
there's a little bit more focus on it. And then also at the same time, we are tailoring the training to what event he has coming up. So if it's Unbound, it's more
Yeah.
longer days on the bike. If it's a shorter mountain bike race, then it would probably look more like what a cross-country mountain biker would do.
And I guess the more you're coming close to the event, the more you train specifically for the event. So perhaps the weaknesses, you try to address them, let's say a couple of months before the race or stuff like that. Or
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, makes sense. So yeah, this way you cover the main points of weakness and you still have time to develop what is good for the event for the person.
Mhm.
Good. And next big topic that now it's becoming quite popular, aerodynamics. So
Yeah.
aerodynamics, big thing. I know
Hmm.
that you did quite some research on this and you like it.
Hmm.
Some sort. Why is it important in at all levels? So if you're going 50 kilometers per hour, you understand that it's important. So it makes a big difference in speed. But the more we learn about it, the more we understand that it makes an impact. Why is it, and how is your view on this?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that some people have this notion that because gravel racing is done at a slower speed, aerodynamics doesn't matter, or even because mountain bike racing is done at a slower speed, aerodynamics doesn't matter. I will, it doesn't matter as much. The slower you go, the less it matters. But even at a speed of, I don't know, say 30 kilometers per hour, which is probably a pretty typical average speed for a gravel race, your aerodynamic drag is the biggest is the biggest drag that you're experiencing. Unless we're going up a very steep climb, but
Mhm.
average it out for the whole course, it's probably the biggest piece of drag that you're experiencing. It's costing you more than your weight, it's costing you more than your drivetrain efficiency, and it's costing you more than your tires, and those are kind of the four marginal gains. It would have to be it would have to be a course with a lot of climbing and very steep climbing for weight to actually outweigh aerodynamics in terms of importance. Um, so it matters. And the other thing that I will say that I talked about in my wind tunnel video is I think that people assume that if you're going at a slower speed, then aero doesn't matter. But actually the slower you're going, the more you're actually out on the course for a longer period of time, and you actually end up saving more time overall
Yeah.
with certain aerodynamic gains the slower you go, which is a bit hard for people to wrap their minds around right now. I do recommend that they go watch my wind tunnel
Yeah, yeah,
video
yeah,
on gravel aerodynamics to get a better idea of what I'm talking about here. But it's really just the fact that you're out on the course for such for a longer period of time. So,
yeah.
instead of
To s-
saving
yeah, to
5 minutes for
simplify
a
it,
given arrow savings, you might save
yeah,
7 minutes.
to simplify it, if you, I mean, if in 5 hours you gain 3%, okay, from aerodynamics, okay,
Mhm.
if you go slower, you can gain 2%, but over 10 hours, the total time that you gain is bigger. I guess the idea more or less is this one.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And you tested in the wind tunnel. You tested also with, they're developing quite a few interesting new sensors now. So did you try something of that, or is it something unexplored yet?
Sorry, what's that?
They started making some sensors. I think one is in partnership also now with Trek Lidl,
Yeah,
the
arrow
team.
sensor.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the aero sensor. Then they're developing the body rocket with mainly the triathletes. So Olaf and the Norwegian guys are on that one. There have been some others around, but I think those two, in my opinion, are the more interesting ones. They're quite expensive, and to be honest, at this stage are also a little bit hard to get it right because the testing has to be done in
Hmm.
calculated conditions and everything. But more or less, the idea is that they can give you a near real-time estimate or calculation or measurement of your CDA.
Hmm.
I mean, it is starting to become more and more popular in road cycling. I have never seen it yet in gravel or in mountain bike.
Have you used an arrow sensor before?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm currently using it.
Okay.
I'm
Which
also
one?
the Aero Coach,
Arrow coach.
the
Okay.
Aero Sensor. Yeah,
Yeah.
Aero Sensor is it? Yeah, that's the name, I guess.
Hmm.
And what I see there is that you can have, let's say, quite big CDA improvements, but what you lose is the efficiency that you have. So let's say in a normal position, you can express 350 watts, whatever. In a better position, you can express 340 or, 10 watts less. This is probably what I see as the biggest problem of aerodynamics, and also in triathlon. So it's a big focus, but how much efficient do you want to be? How much are you willing to sacrifice? I don't know your back or
Hmm.
your leg if afterwards you have to run a marathon or if you have to stay in that position for 10 hours.
Hmm.
The aero testing that you did, how did you adapt, let's say, on your position? Was it something that was natural to change, or you were in trouble, you couldn't adapt for some months? How was your experience in that?
Well, I going back to the arrow sensor real quick, I will say that
Yeah,
I have used an arrow sensor. The one that I used is Ghibli, and they are actually working on doing real-time CDA. So you're looking down, in this case, you're looking at your phone, you're not looking at your head unit, but you're looking down at your handlebars and you're seeing your CDA in real time, which is pretty
yeah,
cool to see. Uh, we'll see if that ever gets to a point where it's user friendly enough that people are using it like they do the power meter now. I think that's the goal, is that this is a piece of technology that is pretty universally used amongst road cyclists and triathlons to the, it's like
yeah,
the power meter.
yeah,
If you're a serious cyclist, you've got an arrow sensor on your bike. It's definitely not that user friendly right now, but I think that would be the goal.
yeah,
Um, yeah, as far as the changes that I made, we tested a little bit with position, but to be honest, the what we found with the positional changes was stuff that I already knew. Arrow bars were faster. The puppy paws position was faster than doing arrow hoods, but arrow hoods was faster than drops and drops. So I didn't necessarily learn anything new there, and
Mhm.
it didn't necessarily make me adapt my position, but there were certain things that I learned from the wind tunnel that were surprising to me. Uh, I actually put this as the thumbnail of the video, and this was perhaps one of the most surprising results is that wearing a hydration pack was faster than not wearing a hydration pack. Um, and along those lines, putting a bottle in your back pocket was faster. Having bottles in the frame was faster. Having a frame bag was faster. Almost anything that you could do to, fill in the the gap in your frame made the bike faster. So that was that was interesting because that's all equipment that gravel racers tend to already use, and it turns out it may improve aerodynamics as well.
And you want full performance mode, or you said, okay, whatever you want, but I will not put a backpack on my back and go on a starting grid with a backpack. How was
It
the approach there?
it depended on the race. It is actually quite common for gravel racers in the US to wear a hydration pack, and I did wear a hydration pack for some races. I will say that if it's too hot or there's too much climbing, the pack can be heavy and hot. So while it does give you a lot of extra liquid to drink, it's kind of hot on your back and it creates upper body fatigue. Um, so I didn't use it for every race. If it was a race with a lot of climbing, I didn't use
Mhm.
it. But for the flatter races, I was using it. I don't think that I used every single aero gain that we found because some of them included adding a big touring bag to my bike, which I think would increase the weight too much and make it handle poorly. But I did change quite a few things after that wind tunnel trip.
Mhm. No, I mean the backpack is interesting. It's something that in your normal mind you would say, no, it's too strange, it's too awkward, but then it works, you implement it, and you
Hmm.
have some, let's call them gains. I see that similar things are appear also in clothing.
Hmm.
So there is research coming also from skiing, from Nordic skiing, that indicates that having a warmer body in certain conditions makes you faster. Let's say makes you more efficient. Let's say on various parts of the body, mainly the legs. The upper part can have some advantages to have a little bit lower temperature, but this depends. But still, you see, for example, in professional cycling on the Stelvio with 2, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, people in shorts,
Hmm.
so short pants, short, everything. They're just semi-naked, going downhill at 5 degrees Celsius. I don't know how much Fahrenheit is that, but it's very cold.
Hmm.
What do you think about this? Do you think there is a role of, let's say, tradition or pride in people that tend to ignore something that can be beneficial for them just to look stronger or to be more linked to tradition, or they're
Yeah,
just ignore it?
I'm there's a spectrum of when you get to high level racing, there's kind of a spectrum of how much people care or don't care about marginal gains, right? So I would say I'm on one end of the spectrum where I care a lot about marginal gains and I really geek out over it and I try to optimize as much as possible. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there's riders who they don't care. They don't wear aero socks. They don't wax their chain. They don't do this. They don't do that.
You
It's
wax your
all
chain.
I do wax.
Of
Yeah.
course, wax your chain. Why did I
Yeah.
even ask?
So, I mean, I can't get into their head. And to be honest, I have a very hard time understanding the motivation of these people. Like I don't really know what to me, ever since I started racing, it's just always been if it's faster, is doing this faster? Oh, it is faster. Okay, I'll do it. I don't. I mean, within limitation, right? Um, I'm not saying I'll do absolutely anything to get faster, but it's just I actually have quite a hard time understanding the mentality of these people that are just leaving potential gains on the table. I actually really have a hard time understanding it.
But as a coach, certainly you have some of these people that you train.
Mhm.
Uh, in my experience, the typical example is the chain rings. So
Mhm.
usual chain rings in the past was the 53-39. Now it's becoming 52-36. And most people that race are reluctant, at least in Italy, in Europe, to put the 50-34, especially at lower levels. At lower levels, I mean, let's say around 4 watts per kilo, 3.5, 3, so around those area. It is very, very uncommon to see people, that finish in the first 10, 20% of the races that go with the super compact, or with the, how is it, compact, super compact 50-34,
Mhm.
or the small
Compact.
one. Compact should be, yeah. And then I look at some data and I see this thing. They're doing a training ride. They chose for some, let's say, aerobic low intensity an uphill road, and then finding themselves in trouble. They have to respect probably let's call it the zone 2. So they have to stay at a certain wattage, and the cadence starts to go down, go down, go down. At the point it reaches 70, 60, and you have two choices there. Either you increase your cadence and you got above your lines, or you go up at 50 cadence.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do here is to talk with these people and say, it's very nice that you have a 52-36, but unless you reach 5 watts per kilo or something, you are not able to do climbs that are more of 8% at your zones that you're supposed to do. Also in your races, I know for sure that, do you know the Zone Colan?
Mhm.
The super steep climb, I think it has 6 kilometers at 16%. So Froome chose his gearing so that he was able to spin 85 RPM on the climb. The idea in Italy is, okay, I have a 36-30. I can go, since Froome used it, I will use the same gearing. How it designs that they go up at 50 RPM, and talking them into changing gears because they could have some more benefits in training and in racing is very difficult, because the good guys use this kind of gearing. Do you have these cases, or people in the US are make a little bit more sense on this? And if you have, how do you try to persuade people?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know. I think that actually people in the US are pretty open to running low gears. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I also hang around. I don't hang around road cyclists, road racer types as much. I would say in gravel, people have embraced low gearing because some gravel climbs can get quite steep. But I mean, the you can find this in any aspect of equipment, to be honest with you. My big one right now is gravel tire size.
Mhm.
I think that gravel tire size is going to only get bigger over time, just like what happened with road cycling and what happened with mountain biking. Tires got bigger. Gravel's a little bit of a newer discipline, so I think over time tires will get bigger, but people just see what the pros run, and that's what they run.
Mhm.
And I think I've had the same discussion about handlebars for certain races. I ran a drop bar mountain bike for certain races that are, quote, mountain bike races. And there are a lot of people that think it's a bad idea just because that race has always been done on a flat bar mountain bike, a traditional mountain bike. And um, yeah, I mean, what the pros are doing holds a lot of weight with people. And I think if if there's anything that I've learned from doing this sport as long as I have, it's that even the pros are not getting it right all of the time. I mean, you only have to go 15 years back in cycling history to see pros wearing baggy clothing,
Oh, yeah.
tires that were too narrow, tire pressures that were too high. Go down the list of stuff that they were not optimizing with their equipment. And I think to just assume that we've hit the point where we no longer need to optimize just because we're currently living in this current year
Oh, yeah.
is why would 2023 or 2024 be the point where we no longer need to optimize?
Uh,
I mean, I think it's just going to continue to progress, and just because somebody's a pro rider does not mean that their equipment is as optimal as it could be.
where do you see the most potential for changes? Uh, because I have an opinion on this, and I think that one of the key areas for improvement is the UCI limitations about the size and the measurements of the bikes. So if that changes, I mean, how the last one was the hoods, they could be bent in forward, now they can't be bent anymore. But if you remove some limits like triathlon has done, I think that is one of the major points that can lead to maybe even a radical change in bikes as they're conceived. What is your opinion? What do you see that can be a game changer in the next, let's say, 20, 30 years,
Sure.
if any?
Yeah, well, a lot of it depends on the UCI rules. If the UCI would kind of lay off the rules, then I would think you would see bikes change quite a bit to get more aerodynamic than they currently are. But they're currently under the restrictions of the UCI, so that might not happen. I think probably the biggest thing that we'll see is tire optimization, and I
Mhm.
referenced this just a moment ago. I think there's more room to be optimized with gravel racing. I just think that gravel tires need to be quite a bit wider than they currently are to be optimal. And I've actually tested this. I've tested
Mhm.
wider tires versus the same version, but in a narrower. Almost always, I come away with the conclusion that the wider tire is faster.
Uh,
Um,
uh,
and of course, it depends on how rough the gravel that you're riding is, and how fast the race speeds are. Because as you increase the tire width, then there's more aerodynamic drag too. But I think that for gravel, at least the increased tire width, the improvement that you get in rolling resistance makes up for the reduced
yeah.
aerodynamic efficiency. So I think that the same thing can happen in road cycling too. I wouldn't be surprised if road tires also get wider, and if if road rims get wider, then they can actually be quite aerodynamic, even though the tire is wider. And I think particularly for certain races like Paris-Roubaix, I just don't think that they're on the right bike for Paris-Roubaix at all. I think it's completely the wrong bike for that situation. I think what I've talked about this on, I think, three different podcasts at this point, but I think that the optimal bike for Roubaix would probably be an aerodynamic gravel bike, basically a bike that's as aerodynamic as a road bike, but with much wider tire clearance. And then the tires, I think, probably need to be closer to the 40 to 45 millimeter range. I
Which
don't
is
think that
a lot.
I know road
For
race.
road standards, it's a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
when you switch to 28s, you feel, oh man, this is comfy.
So road racers are definitely going to freak out about that, but and I get that Paris-Roubaix is mostly pavement and not, and it's not all cobbles. In fact, it's not even mostly cobbles. It's a small percentage that's actually cobbles, but the race is won and lost usually in the cobble
Yeah,
sections.
yeah,
So we're already seeing riders do stages of Grand Tours on a climbing bike where
yeah.
it's mostly flat just so that they have an advantage for the final climb. I mean, we're already seeing riders ride a bike that is not optimal for the majority of the race just so they have an advantage where it really
Where it
matters. And I
counts.
I see the same thing with Roubaix, to be honest.
So we're saying here that gravel could have some, let's say, cross benefits to other disciplines, no? And
Yeah, I definitely
do
think
you
so.
see cross benefits also from other sports in cycling? Anything that comes to your mind? Because I will tell you an anecdote. I'm married with an ex-professional tennis player,
Mhm.
and they play matches that are 2, 3, 4 hours, and they usually went to the match with a bottle of water, and that's it. That's it. Oh no, come on! You need a gel every hour at least, or every half an hour,
Mhm.
and they say no, no. If you want, I'll make some potassium and stuff like that, and that's it. We don't do that. Or the other thing is they play in the sun, and no
Mhm.
one in tennis wear glasses. No, no
Oh
one
wow.
ever. No,
Yeah.
it's tradition. It's how the sport developed. But if you think about it, it's the same as we did before. We are stubborn with the 53-39 gearing, and that's probably happening in some other sports too. If you take the part that is, let's say, on the nutrition from cycling to tennis, could lead in some improvements. I understand the sports are different, but having high levels of carbs or even caffeine during matches can bring some advantages that in at very very high levels. I think that the top 50 in the world they do it, but the other areas is not present at all. In cycling, almost everyone now goes on 100 grams or 80 grams per carbs, 60, whatever you want per
Mhm.
hour, and it's become natural. I would really like to see if something like that comes from other sports to cycling. Uh, I struggle to find something.
Well, I mean, if I were to try to think of an example, I mean, you could maybe throw weightlifting in there.
Mhm,
Traditionally, cyclists have not been big on weightlifting,
mhm,
but I would say that the prevalence of weightlifting is becoming more common amongst elite level cyclists, and a lot of that weightlifting knowledge is not gained through cyclists or traditional cycling coaches. It's usually gained through other sports where lifting is actually very common.
yeah,
So
sure.
that would maybe be an example. I don't know if you saw the recent video that I did on the Norwegian method, but the Norwegian method traditionally comes from running, and now more triathletes are using it. So while those are both endurance sports, so they're very similar to cycling, uh, I wouldn't be surprised if in the near future, given the popularity of the Norwegian method for running and triathlon, if we see people start to try to adapt it in cycling and see more cyclists testing their blood lactate and all of that.
Mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah. That is for sure interesting. Uh, I've seen cycling trying to go into skiing. In Italy, there is a friendly group of cyclists that is very connected to skiers. It's quite known, and they told that sometimes they were bringing a cyclette on skiing races because after 10, 12 minutes there's a cardiac drift, so people body understands that you're not going to the couch anymore, and this kind of efforts as warm up before a downhill race could have an improvement. They abandon it because it's impossible to bring an indoor trainer on
Mhm.
3,000 meters of uphill. But there was a tentative there, which was quite funny for me, in my opinion. You just imagine a skier just cycling there in the snow until he starts. Could
Yeah,
work.
it would seem to make sense. I have seen downhill mountain bike racers do that.
Mhm.
Downhill mountain bike racers will put their, I don't know if they put their downhill bikes or they put their trail bike on a trainer at the top before they do their run. I don't know how they got the trainer all the way up there at the top of the mountain, but I've seen that.
Yeah, they managed it. Yeah, we need more science on cross sports, I guess. Could be very interesting and bring us to unexpected things. So we've already seen a lot of insane athletes coming from different sports. Rowers that go into cycling are pretty common.
Mhm.
Nordic skiers also, and a lot to learn. And instead on scientific papers, since I mean, you're an expert on that, to put it shortly. A lot of times, when you go deep into some papers, you find a thesis and a counter thesis from another scientific paper that tells the opposite. How do you behave in these cases? Do you make a sort of, let's say, okay, I have 6 papers that tell something, and I have 3 papers that tell the opposite. The 6 papers win. How is your approach usually in
Right. Yeah.
doing this?
So many people will often rightly point out that you can find a study that will confirm your bias. If you're only looking at one study, it doesn't tell you a whole lot, and you can try to do the analysis yourself, but I think that it's probably better to lean on meta-analysis, if that exists in whatever topic you're trying to research. So they've already done this for you. They've looked at the studies on the topic, and they've assessed what is the strength of the evidence in either direction. So I will try to do that myself, but I'll also lean on meta-analysis to do this, and review papers to do this, to kind of strengthen my conclusion. So if there are a lot of my videos will come to the conclusion at the end of the video. Yeah, there's some evidence that suggests this, there's some evidence that suggests that. It's hard to say. But there are some videos where I am stronger in my conclusion at the end of the video. Just as an example, my weightlifting videos, I have quite a couple videos on weightlifting. The majority of the evidence points to the fact that weightlifting is beneficial for cyclists. So I'm much stronger with that conclusion than I would be for, say, a video about I don't know what the optimal cadence is or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe at the end of that video, I'm a little bit more wishy-washy because the studies are more wishy-washy. I mean, you may find a study that says this and a study that says that, and it's harder to make a more concrete conclusion.
But
You
do
may
you use
also
yourself as a guinea pig also in the studies, or you said, okay, the protocol is very hard, and I just trust these guys?
Yeah, I have changed my training plenty based off of what the research says. So for example, I've done videos on fasted training, and I would say that the research on fasted training is a little iffy. There's plenty of studies that show fasted training doesn't really do anything, but there are a few studies using a certain protocol that show that fasted training might show a benefit.
You like it or
And
not, the
so
fasted training?
this is what I was going to say is I have tried it myself, and it is so hard for me to implement because I'm one of these people that is very hungry in the morning when I wake up, and I really enjoy breakfast. Not everybody is like this. Some people can easily skip breakfast and it's no problem for them, but I'm not one of those people. And going out on a fasted ride in the morning and not eating breakfast is very mentally and physically draining for me, and it just didn't really work for me. And the evidence for it was already loose to begin with, so I kind of gave up on that. That's just one example, but
Yeah. I'll give
yeah.
you the counter example on this. So, I mean, I haven't trained I haven't reached high level of performance, but I've been in the 5 to 5.5 watts per kilo area,
Mhm.
and for amateurs in Italy, that's pretty decent. And one of the things that helped me, probably it was a placebo, I don't know, but helped me was this fasted training because it allowed me to train more. So I could
Mhm.
insert an extra half an hour or an hour. I couldn't insert a much longer ride, maybe an hour and a half in the morning before going to work, and then do my session or in the afternoon or in the evening. And this extra hour, for me, over some months, had some benefits. At a point, I just learned to, you wake up and you go on the trainer, or you go an hour for indoor, and then you start the day. So yeah, I think this is where trying the things on yourself can have a different result. No? So not everyone reacts to the same thing in the same way. Also in the test, they always give the results about the average. Yeah, I understand this
Exactly.
is the average and this is where the people went. In the average, there is some people that decrease the performance, and some people, and maybe most of them, that increase the performance. So yeah, well, that
Exactly.
is
No, that's a great point to make, is that those research studies are dealing with the average for the group. Some of them provide the raw data, so you can see how much the group varied. But it's important to recognize that there's huge individual variation in response to training, and there's actually been research on that, and I've done a video on that. Just as an example, you give subjects the same exercise protocol. Let's say it's on a bike or it's running or whatever it is, and just take a metric like VO2 max improvement. There's a bell curve of VO2 max improvement, and the average will improve this much, but then there's some hyper responders that will improve a lot, and then there's some people that don't respond very well that will hardly improve at all. And they were all given the exact same training. There's no difference in the training. It's just the difference in how people responded.
this is probably also where you as a coach can make a big difference on the people that you train. So giving them certain protocols, you see which one work best for the people that you train, insist on those. If you see that some people instead doesn't have the reaction that you were expecting, okay, there are other protocols that can lead to, in a different way, they should lead to a similar result. So you say, okay, this one didn't work for you. So instead of developing your VO2 max in, let's say, 30-30 intervals, you start doing 2 minutes and 30 of single intervals. So the characteristics is a bit different. Perhaps this person can have bigger improvements if they change the way they train VO2. Even if the science says, okay, this is the most efficient. If for the person it doesn't work, I think that the role of the coach there is to identify, this went well, this went a little bit below expectations. If it went below expectations, try to understand why and what can you change. So at least from my perspective, this is what I tend to do with people. And also having their feedback is very important in my opinion, because if you understand, yeah, I did this, but as you said, for me, it was very hard to do the fastest ride in the morning. Okay. If it's very hard to do, and even if it brings some benefits, we can probably find something that for you is easier to do and brings very similar benefits. So
Right.
that can be the preferred way to go.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, with fasted riding in particular, it was interesting to hear your experience with it. I have talked to people who've had the same experience. Fasted training actually really did work well for them, and they were able to implement it with no problem. So, I mean, again, it just goes to show you that people are different.
I think that my dinner was just very big the day before.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the last topics that I want to touch is the use of Strava in training and also in gravel. So usually when I mean in road cycling, Strava segments became the norm. People started to look at them, have benchmarks, and also when preparing races, when they do some briefings, they check the times of the climb based on Strava segments. In gravel, is it applicable? Do Strava segments even exist, or sometimes you just find on a road that is not so populated in Strava, or its metrics can change a lot based on temperature, wind, snow.
Mm-hmm.
How is Strava
Yeah, Strava is just as big in gravel as it is in any other discipline.
Okay.
There are Strava times for gravel climbs. I mean, in the area that I'm in, there honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there are more off-road Strava times or Strava segments than there are road Strava segments.
Mhm.
I could be wrong about that, but there's a lot of off-road riding around me, if you include the mountain biking, and there's plenty of gravel roads too, and there's Strava segments for all of them, and people take those Strava segments seriously. I think that the of course, conditions play a role in road Strava segments because if you have a tailwind or a headwind or
Oh, yeah.
different temperature, all of that. I think the extra little bit that also plays a role in off-road Strava segments is how damp the the dirt is or the gravel is. So if the gravel is really wet and soggy, you might roll slower because you're actually it's almost like you're riding through mud
Mhm.
um, versus a very dry, very fast day. You might go a little bit faster. So I
But
guess
when you
that's a
prepare races, you look at Strava segments or you look at other informations.
Strava
How is your
segments is
approach on that?
definitely something that I would look at. Yeah. So if for example I'm looking at a race profile for a gravel race that I'm doing and I see that there's a big climb at the end and you know I can roughly see what the distance of the climb is, but I don't know what kind of effort that's going to be. I go to Strava, I look at what the times of the climb is. I'm like, okay, so now it's roughly a 20-minute climb if you're going fast, and this is the kind of power that's going to be required to go that fast up the climb, and this is the kind of time and power outputs that riders were doing last year on the climb. So yeah, Strava is a useful tool for racing, um,
Mhm.
even in gravel cycling.
And for training, do you, I mean, as a coach, if you see the people that you train targeting Strava segments, is that something that you implement or I mean, you just want to avoid from training? What's your view on that?
It depends on the person. For myself, I almost never go after Strava segments.
Mhm.
If I do go after a Strava segment, it's usually a downhill Strava segment where I don't actually have to pedal hard.
Mhm.
Um, Occasionally, I will go after a Strava segment on a climb. Very occasionally, I would say this is a 2 or 3 times a year phenomenon. Um, I'm generally much more of the do the intervals as prescribed type of rider, and whether that means you get to the top of the climb or not, you know,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. Turn around when your interval is done. So I'm generally not the type of rider that goes after Strava segments. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily against it. If I were hypothetically, I don't coach a rider like this right now, but if I was hypothetically coaching a rider that was really into Strava and that's what motivated them to ride, and getting the KOM on their local climb was their motivation to train, I wouldn't stop them from doing that. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily see a problem with that.
Mhm. Because I think that I do sometimes is train the VO2 on Strava segments. So also for the motivation side, um, to some athletes, I tell them, okay, in the next let's say 4 weeks, we'll be focusing on VO2. During this period, we'll make some exercises and we'll make a couple of rides. But during the ride, you can choose whatever you want as long as it has a duration between, let's say, 2 minutes and 6 minutes, and you insert a total of 20 minutes of effort done this way. From what I've seen, this person has a very solid effort in this kind of rides, and maybe even more than in traditional intervals, and find some extra motivation to go do hard intervals. So this is something that I really like in this way. And the
Mhm.
other part is testing. So just maximal power, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 20, whatever. The idea there is instead of doing a CP20, CP30, CP40 or something, is okay, we need to make some tests, choose a climb that is more or less between 17 and 23 minutes and go full gas, or find one that is 40 or between 40 and 50 and do the same. This way I found that for the people it's much nicer to approach the same thing, because if I try to tell them, yeah, we're doing 40 minutes test indoors, they look at me and said, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple that would say yes, 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 but the majority of of the people that I cover would deeply hate me. Instead,
I would be one of those people if you told me to do it indoors. I hate indoor training.
But it's indoor training can be the perfect testing conditions, no? So there is a mix between things, no? Testing in perfect conditions indoor, everything is controlled, and testing outdoors in, let's say, imperfect conditions.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite? The outdoor testing, right?
Well, personally, I don't ride indoors unless I absolutely have to, which
Lucky you, man.
where I live, that usually happens 3 or 4 times a year that I have to ride indoors. So it's not very common. And I will ride in pretty horrendous weather before I ride indoors. You know, in cold rain. I would usually prefer to ride in cold rain than indoors.
Okay, okay.
And when I'm testing, I'm lucky to live where I am, where I've got sustained climbs that last much longer than 20 minutes, where I can do testing pretty easily. There's not much traffic. There's no stop signs, stop lights. And if I'm testing, I always test outdoors. I've actually never done a test on the trainer in my life.
Oh, this is a big one. Okay. Yeah, that's very good conditions actually
Yeah.
to also to have fun on the bike at the end of the story, because I
Hmm.
think everyone has more fun outdoors than indoors.
Hmm.
This is coming from a guy that yesterday did 5 hours indoors on
Oh,
staring at the
wow.
wall. So,
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, nice. And how often do you test yourself and the people that you coach? Is there a rule, or is just when you see it, puff, let's go and check the
Yeah,
parameters?
it depends on the person. Usually it's more in the base season and off season as you gain fitness and you're kind of trying to get an idea of where you're at. And then once race season hits, you're testing less. I mean, during the base season, it might be once a month or once every 2 months, and then during the race season, kind of forego testing just because you're constantly racing and recovering. Um, and then I think that there's a certain level of athlete where you can actually get a pretty good idea of where you're at based on how your workouts are going, and you don't
No,
necessarily need to do a formal test.
no,
If you do an FTP style workout and you can hold a certain wattage for 4 by 15 minutes or 4 by 10 minutes, then
no.
you have a pretty good idea of where you're at, and you don't necessarily need to go out and do a specific FTP test to figure
Yeah,
that out.
yeah, yeah. If you can handle 6 per 10 minutes at 320, your FTP will not be 300 now. So
Right.
it makes sense. Also, I think you can extrapolate data from races, sometimes. But
Yeah, definitely.
in testing, are you the kind of person that always likes to repeat the same test in the, let's say, on the same climb, or you say, okay, I will test this today in this way, and you know there's plenty of information that you can derive from tests that are different, so it can be
Hmm.
different testing. So to put it short, you try to mix testing protocols, or you have one and you keep that one for your whole life.
I have always done a 20-minute test since I was 16 years old, so I still do a 20-minute test. It's not even necessarily to find my FTP, it's just because that's something that I have done for so long and it's easily comparable. So, and where I live, I always do it on the same climb. And this climb that I do it on is the climb that I do most of my intervals on. I'm super familiar with the climb. I've probably done that climb 400 times. So so it's a very shallow gradient and it's very long. And I actually have the KOM up it, and the KOM is 35 minutes, so it's plenty of time to do a 20-minute test. And and yeah, it works well. So I'm not changing a lot of variables when I'm testing. It's the same climb, it's the same duration. So yeah.
And, and you know that if you reach this stone at the climb, it's a good point.
Exactly.
If that
Exactly.
stone
Yeah.
is still far away, it's like, oh no.
Right.
No, that's interesting. So after 20 minutes, you just stop and turn around. I mean, stop and puke, stuff like that. You don't
Exactly.
go until the top.
Exactly. No, 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 no. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. No, my idea of testing, for me is I always use the 5 plus 15, and that is a
Hmm.
stable. So I like that one. I keep doing that one. But
Hmm.
another one is that I also really like is I test a climb. So I have this climb of 3.5 kilometers, and I don't care if this here is 10 or minutes or 10:30 or 9:30. I just want to do the complete climb and see where is power. I understand that if it's 9 minutes, it's a certain percentage of FTP, or if it's 11, it's a different. But that's another parameter that I really like into consideration. It's like a reality check of how
Hmm.
is your data and if your power meter is still accurate, more or less, because
Right.
it
Yeah.
can go
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
far out. So yeah. So and you the tests that you like the most are the maximal effort test, or do you test also submaximal?
So when you say submaximal, which tests are you referring to?
I'm referring, for example, a test of lactate. You can check where is the threshold of first lactate threshold or the second. Those
Mhm.
are those can be determined without maximal efforts, or
Right.
can be another test that is common in my area is you keep the same heart rate for 30 minutes, and you see how the power to HR varies. So if you're efficient the exact same
Mhm.
way in the first minutes or in the last
Yeah.
of the 30
So
minutes.
like I said, I've been doing 20-minute tests for since I was 16 years old, so over 10 years now. But I did do my first lactate test this winter,
Mhm.
and I found it very interesting because we were able to find LT1 and LT2, which is important. Um, and it's probably something that I'll start implementing more often. I like you said, it's not a maximal test. You don't need to, you
Yeah.
know, you don't feel like you need a puke after you're done with it. And it actually provided some information that you don't get from just doing a normal FTP test. So yeah, I liked it, and it's probably something that I'll experiment more with and possibly implement more in the future.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, even if you say that in gravel racing, I think that that can have an edge, no, given the kind of effort that you do. So if you're mentioning
Mhm.
that you stay a lot of time in the tempo zone, which is zone free, it has a lot of connection with the LT1. So the
Right.
higher the LT1 is, and this is not information that you find in a max. Oh,
Right.
good. So we'll see how this goes on you. I guess something will appear in your channel if things go right.
Oh
But
yeah, definitely. Definitely, yeah.
well, good. I would really like to thank you about this conversation. A lot of stuff on gravel, a lot of stuff on something that I was not expecting. So how is it becoming popular in the US and
Hmm.
how long those races are? It scares me a little, but I think it can be fun. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This was good. I appreciate it.
very nice, and yeah, I'll be looking forward. When you sorry, where will you race this year?
I'm in the Lifetime Grand Prix again this year. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of the premier professional gravel racing series here in the US. So that'll be my main focus. There's a small chance that I might do the Gravel World Championships. We'll see. Other than that, I don't know if I'll be coming to Europe to race at all, but maybe in the future.
Sometimes you should try.
Yeah.
It will be fun. So again, thanks for the conversation, and yeah, good luck with your races and everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.